Hi, welcome to the latest episode of the blue shirt wearing Wellbeing show. I didn't realise we haven't coordinated our colours this morning, folks. It just happens to have been that way. I've got a great guest on with me. Alex is up near Kendal, which I'm highly jealous of, not because of the sugar cake, but just because I know how beautiful it is up there. And I'm stuck in Hackney. Wow. There you go. But I'm off to the Alps next month, so I'll make him jealous. I'll send him pictures of me climbing peaks in the Alps and looking over at the Zermatt and all that sort of stuff. So I'll get my own back, is what I'm saying. Alex is here to talk about his work in Mind Over Mountains. Mountains over mind? Mind over, how do you say it?
That's right, yeah. Mind Over Mountains is the word.
There we go. I get confused because there's a very, very famous core textbook in my field called Mind Over Mood, which is a core CBT textbook, which everybody uses. And so I go Mind Over Mountains. And it could be the same thing. So we're going to be discussing Alex, his sort of journey in life, but also what got him to get involved in Mind Over Mountains. I'm not sure if did you set it up as well, Alex? Are you one of the founders?
Yes, I founded the charity back in 2020. The actual idea kind of concept began in 2018. But yeah, we've been a registered charity now for almost 4 years.
Right. Well, I'm going to be fascinated by learning about that because I was saying to Alex just before the show started, literally just before the show, I'm really keen on wilderness and wilderness camping, and I'm going off to the mountains to redo my alpine introductory course, and I'll be looking to do some 4,000 meters after that, and then and it's and with my own history of sort of depression, anxiety, and PTSD, I found sort of mountaineering in particular and being out in wilderness an extraordinary boon. So I'm really excited about this. When somebody sent me the link to your organisation, like, oh, great! I'm glad somebody's doing that. And I've been a keen advocate of wilderness therapy in the past as well, which is something slightly different, but I think there's a crossover. So you're not from Kendal originally, Alex? Where are you from? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I was born in Tarpley, which is near Chester. So still very much northwest based, but I moved to Kendal in March 2019. For a number of reasons, as you mentioned, because it's a beautiful place, surrounded by the mountains, which has always been my happy place. It keeps me in a good place mentally and physically. And with my work, I'm really fortunate that I can kind of be anywhere. So why not be somewhere where when I'm not doing talks and when I'm not speaking, I'm able to run up a hill from my door, which today is a busy day. I've got lots of calls and meetings, but on my lunch break, I'll be running up a hill. And in the evening, I'll be going for a swim. And I've been here to be able to build that outdoor kind of lifestyle because I think that's where we all need to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were lucky moving to the Kendal in 2019. That was fortunate. You couldn't have planned that better, to be honest.
Yeah, it was very fortunate, and I think I'm very lucky that the pandemic was a fairly comfortable experience to me. And I had it easier than a lot of people because being able to run and escape people and get out into the open and just find hope and calm in all the chaos was a real blessing. So yeah, if only we knew what was going to happen a year later, it felt like one of my better life decisions, to be honest.
It's interesting because on Eyam, which is not, I mean, you're not on Eyam, but in the Dales, Eyam Moor and Eyam Village, which I know very well. Eyam Village was the first place that the plague came to in the north of England. And you can go visit it to this day. It's got one of those vinegar ponds that you were supposed to wash off it. They thought at that time that if you had washed your hands and your feet in vinegar, so they had a vinegar well and stuff like that. So it's a sort of, but it was an interesting connection. I thought I just remembered it because I sort of walked all around those areas in Kendal and Moors and all. So growing up in Cheshire, I imagine that was pretty beautiful. It is really quite extraordinary as well.
Yeah, I mean, I had a fairly normal upbringing. I was really lucky that, my parents gave me everything I needed. I'm an only child, which I guess changed things as well. Cheshire's flat-ish. There's not a huge amount there, but it's very green, a lot of countryside, a lot of farming. My nearest hill was probably the Old Pale, which is only about, I think, I don't think it's over. I think it's just over 100 meters compared to the Lake Districts, where I've got Scarfell Pike, not too far away. But it was green, you know, and there was lots of nature. And I think that definitely instilled this early interest in nature and the outdoors and green space. And almost it's become an instinctive part of my life because I grew up around it. But yeah, I had a fairly normal start, and I didn't have this initial obsession with sports or big extreme challenges or mountains. It was quite the opposite. I mean, I hated sport at school, and I think it all stemmed from a few challenges, really. I had epilepsy when I was 9, which triggered a lot of anxiety and panic attacks as a result of that at such a young age. And, you know, because of that, going out and doing things without my parents there was quite intimidating for quite a long time. I was bullied all the way through school, which didn't really help my self-esteem or confidence. And I've had a stammer ever since I've been able to speak, which is interesting considering now my day job is motivational speaking, and I speak to conferences and events all around the world.
Just want to stop us a second. We talked before the show about triggering subjects and stuff like that. Bullying is one of those triggering subjects. You know, yeah. I'm aware that some people. I did a project many years ago when I was working in the arts, where we wrote a play called "Only Playing This," which was a collection of stories from people being bullied from adults who 40 years later were just telling their stories because it was such a horrific experience. I'm sorry you were bullied, and it's an unfortunate thing that happens, and it may be that people who are listening will identify with that, either adults or children and young people going through it right now. If you're a kid at school, there's a great organisation called Childline, which is a really good place to start if you're finding there are problems at school or at home. It's really important to find a trusted adult. You may be worried about telling your parents, and that's okay, because you may be worried that they will cause more problems. I understand that. That's fine. I used to be social services manager for my sins and worked a lot with kids in difficult positions. But somewhere like Childline is great. Do you know of any organisations as well, Alex, that help young people who are struggling at school? Would you suggest anyone? Did you reach out to anyone at all?
I'll be honest, mine was purely whilst I was at school, literally till the day I started, till the day I left. And we only ever addressed it through the school. We because it happened during school, it was more of a school issue. So we never, me and my parents never use external support. But I know there is a helpline for more from a mental health perspective with Young Minds have a helpline for parents. And also Shout is another great resource, for anybody of any age to find access to somebody, essentially somebody to talk to.
Message service, isn't it?
It's a text message service, because just to ring somebody can be very overwhelming, especially having a stammer. Because I do think that bullying and mental health are so closely linked as well. So if people are generally struggling, those are two great places to start. But also parents. I had a talk yesterday where a parent came afterwards and said about their child had been bullied and was really struggling, and asked me that exact thing in terms of what can they do. And so if any parents are struggling with that, then Young Minds do have a parent helpline which could be helpful. We always try to start with the school to address the bullying.
So people can become quite suicidal. We might go into your experiences a little bit more if that's okay, because I think it might be helpful. There's other organisations such as Papyrus, which are a suicide support organisation for young people. They're amazing, absolutely extraordinary. Folks, there'll be links to all these organisations underneath in the chat boxes. So don't worry about having to Google them if you want, but don't worry about having to do that. The links will be there. So you told your parents about the bullying, and what was their response? Did they take it seriously and try and do something about it?
Yeah, I mean, I was very close to my mum, and she was fuming. She's always been very determined, my mum, and very stubborn, and she was straight into school trying to sort it out. And it was mostly verbal, but it did become physical when I was a bit older, and it got to the point that I started cycling 10 miles to school every day just to avoid all the abuse on the school bus. The benefit of that is I got into cycling and got very fit, but the fact is I shouldn't have had to do that. My mum was really supportive. They did take it seriously, and in some ways she didn't let that drop until the school gave her a good enough answer and actually sorted it. And I appreciate from the school's perspective, it can be really challenging to address and tackle it because it's so hard to find evidence, to find who's culpable, and then force those students to actually change their behaviour. The real challenge now, what really worries me for young people, is so much happens online. I mean, I left school. I mean, I left school 10 years ago, and back then, it feels a long time. Blimey, I feel old, but social media was less of a thing.
I promise you, Alex, you're not. Take a look at the mirror. You're not old.
Well, I do think though social media was less of a thing then, so it's even more challenging because it can be so like anonymous now. But
Yeah.
but yeah, what that bullying left me with was a real feeling of frustration, you know, like there's something wrong with me, like I wasn't good enough, and it just really affected my self-worth and my self-esteem, and that's been the long-term effects of bullying. But when I look back at it now, and people often ask me, you know, have I seen all the bullies since I left school? And I have, and they're exactly where I thought they'd be, you know. And in some ways, it almost motivated me to find the outdoors, which I guess I'll talk more about. But it could have gone one of both ways, and nobody should ever be made to feel like that.
And did the school take it seriously as well? I mean, I understand that what you said is you empathise with the difficulties of it, but did they take it seriously and try and deal with it and try and look after you?
To an extent, yeah. Certain teachers did, certain teachers didn't. It's such a common problem with schools. But yeah, the culprits were found and were dealt with. But it's just so endemic in schools that I don't think you can completely eradicate it. But if you can stop the more serious stuff, I think that's the most important thing.
One of the things, and I think it's one of the things we came across when we were doing research on the show, and one of the things I've come across since is this sort of attitude, well, kids will be kids, trying to wash your hands of it, which I find really unfortunate, and also this very sort of strange attitude from angry men about my age who look a bit like me, calling young people snowflakes and things like that, and saying this should toughen you up. I'm glad you're shaking your head because I despair of that nonsense. I absolutely despair of that nonsense because being unsafe at school is the same as being unsafe at home. I know that as from my psychological training. Attachment processes happen at school. And in fact, during my time when I told you I was a social services manager, so I did a lot of child protection stuff. When we're assessing a child's risks, if say there was risk at home, if they had a stable school, that would be what we call a protective factor.
Yeah.
Because schools reawaken attachment processes and love processes and relationship processes, which are healing, and they can actually repair damage. So that's how powerful the school experience is psychologically and emotionally. It's as important as a family experience, to put it in very simple terms. And so you're nodding. Go ahead.
I mean, there's lots of stuff I could say and agree with there, and I think I was lucky that for the most part I could come home from school and feel safe, and that allowed me to deal with it. I think you can tolerate most things as long as you can find a respite at some point. There was a few issues when I was growing up. You know, my parents kind of split up when I was just starting high school, so I had that double whammy of the whole world felt like a threatening place, and I think that's what triggered a lot of OCD behaviors, a lot of anxiety. And with the bullying, you know, going to school was never an escape from anything. It was just something I dreaded and something I avoided. But those mindsets that you talk about and that kind of idea of, oh, you know, just need to kind of, you know, just need to man up and toughen up is probably why the stats on mental health in young people are so scarily high. Because just because people have maybe dealt with something themselves, maybe in their childhoods they've had to tolerate certain conditions, does not mean it's all relative to their own experience, and doesn't mean that other people have.
The reality of these older folk who are saying these things, they've not dealt with that stuff. Behind the scenes, they're drinking too much, they're eating too much. Exactly. They're broken people, but they're presenting something to the world. But the truth is, they haven't dealt with it. And actually, what is happening in my experiences is a projection of their sense of anger that nobody looked after them. And I remember sort of parents telling me, you know, while we were explaining to them why you don't assault your children, they would say, but it never hurt me when my dad beat me up. Didn't do any harm. No, it did, actually. and we have these repetitions of abuse going on, and I can see it did you harm. And I guess your comment about you've been in touch with some of these bullies and they are where you thought they would be, because obviously they're carrying problems, aren't they?
Yeah.
Then I guess they're not doing so well, is what you're suggesting.
Yeah. From my experience, from what I've seen, I think, we can all be bullies without intending to be, and there's a real difference between a bit of banter as opposed to a real intent to harm. But often I think bullying it's more about the bullying their own issues and how they project it, and they externalize it rather than internalize it. So for me, I've always blamed myself. I think that anger has been, I've turned it on myself rather than those bullies. I was just trying to find a victim and trying to find a target for that expression. And often they have their own issues and that's how they project it, is by bullying people. And I think I do.
For young men, I think you often see this sort of toxic behavior. And behind that, and this is not a justification for toxic behavior, but behind that toxic behavior is toxicity that's happened to them.
Yes.
And it's learned and projected, and it is, as you say, it's the psychological defense mechanism is to place it in somebody else because they can't bear it inside themselves, right?
Yeah, exactly that. And what really surprised me, I guess, is as I left school, I saw bullying in other places, in families, in work, in society, and
in presidential candidates in the US.
Everything, yeah. But
seriously,
go through that as a young person has made me much better able to deal with it now, and just verbally now I can distance myself from that. And what I mean by that is I don't take it on board. I don't take it personally. I see it as I feel empathy for those people that they're still struggling with this thing. And what I've realized now, and this is advice that I give when people ask me, what would I say to myself at school all those years ago, is nobody can make you feel anything without your choice and your permission. Now, that's easy to say now with hindsight. It's very difficult to say when you're a teenager and words really do hurt you. But I see it all the time, and now I have a better understanding that it's about them. It's not about me. It's not a fault of my own.
Yeah. So there are things we could teach young people, is what you're saying. We could be more psychologically informed, give them a better skill set so that they can manage those cognitive distress more effectively.
Yes, I do. And I do agree that, young people do need to be more resilient, but that doesn't excuse these things in the first place, and it's like in the pandemic, people in the NHS were constantly being told, oh, they just need to be more resilient. Well, they shouldn't be having to deal with such difficult conditions and lack of resource and support in the first place. It doesn't undermine the underlying cause. All of us are resilient already. We all have to be resilient. But that doesn't mean we should be forced to put up with that behavior or being bullied. Being resilient will help, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't kind of tackle, the underlying problem first.
In your experience, I don't mean you to be, the young person czar here, but like in your experience, I would say my view is this. I think young people today have much more pressures than I used to have growing up, without doubt. And also new pressures that didn't exist. And one of them is being social media, but also other pressures we couldn't have even imagined. The fact that, having 1 degree is not enough is crazy. I mean, I was a working class young man, one of the only person in my family really to go to university and all of that sort of stuff. And it was quite extraordinary. These were the times. But now I see kids, they've got 8 subjects, A-star plus. They're still struggling to find a university place, and then they go and do their undergraduate degree. Like, it seems bizarre to me that we put so much pressure on kids and so much testing. I mean, what's your experience if you sort of compare and contrast? I mean, I had it easy, to be honest. I think I did.
Yeah, I mean, what I've always felt around pressure is often created inside us. It's our perception of things that create pressure. But naturally, young people aren't going to know how to deal with that at a young age. That's only been learned through time and experience. I don't have a degree at all. I left sixth form. I was going to start a degree, but I had a gap year of trying to climb Everest, and that kind of became a gap year that never ended. And I don't regret them a
That
bit, you
became a
know.
life. Right.
Well, it's the thing. And I remember my head of sixth form saying to me, you know, that all this extracurricular stuff was going to neglect my future career prospects, and then suddenly I'm getting paid to go back and speak at the school, and I am so fortunate that
Hi.
yeah, it was a full circle moment. It really was, and that's not
Yeah.
to show off. It's more to say that I'm really grateful that I didn't follow that conventional path, because that wasn't me. And I see this all the time with um, people I was at school with who are the same age. We all have the same starting point, and there is a real sense of like identity and a purpose kind of crisis where their worth and their success is based on a career or based on grades. And at that age, I don't think you can make decisions for your future, because I'm still, well, I'm where I am now is exactly where I want to be. But at 18, I didn't know that. And I think I've got a good friend who he's still struggling to find himself, because his whole sense of worth was based on achieving X, Y, Z in grades. And I think grades are important for sure, but we need grit as well. We need grit and self-worth and purpose and a sense of contribution. And I think that it's not surprising there are so many young people struggling, and kind of suicides in universities are so high, because
Yeah. Yeah.
people think that they're not good enough if they don't reach something that maybe isn't for them anyway, you know. And it's not easy, because the education system is designed to take you down a set path. But because of the bullying and everything else, I've always wanted to be different. So I found it quite easy to kind of, you know, go against that process. But society is going to try and pull you back to safety.
So tell me
And
about some of the things you did then when you were younger that got you to this point. So if you like your little secret resilience measures, the things that got you
yeah,
through, what was it that got you into nature and your sort of
yeah,
survival?
I guess in summary, I mean, so as I mentioned, school was quite a challenging place for me, and starting high school especially. And you know, I had this whole victim mindset. I was very anxious, very low achieving. Well, I was very academic,
Yeah.
and I could have been a lot more academic, but I just gave up on sixth form pretty much, because I was more interested in climbing mountains. But I found the outdoors. I guess as a child, we used to go walking the dogs. We used to go in the caravans to North Wales, and my parents exposed me to that, and I was so grateful for that. But I didn't really challenge myself or do anything like now until I was about 14, when I went on my first hill walk in the Lake District with my friend Tom. And you know, Tom is a good friend of mine, but one of those people who is very openly like still struggling to kind of find his place in the world. Yeah, we both had that shared experience on that hill walk in the lakes. And from then I found a way to fight back. I found a confidence, I found that drive, that sense of achievement I never had. And I had a realization that I could choose my mindset, I could choose how I responded to these challenges, and wanted to find what else I could overcome after the epilepsy, the stammering, the bullying, and all this. So I got into climbing, into mountain biking, scuba diving, trying every outdoor sport I could. And ultimately, that led to me having a goal to try and climb Everest, which, as we know, is the world's highest peak. That became then a case of a series of milestones, you know, starting running and starting climbing, and then climbing in the Alps and Mont Blanc at 16, going to the Himalayas, getting the experience I needed, and then raising about £35,000 in sponsorship just to get me to the mountain in the first place. So in principle, my life really revolved around Everest from 14, because Everest seemed to be that was my equivalent of university. It was like, that was my version of success. That was my way to prove the bullies wrong, to prove myself wrong, to really feel like I'd achieved something significant in life. Everest didn't go to plan. It just, in summary again, because I could talk to you all day about this, you know, there was a big avalanche in 2014. So we had
Yeah,
to
I
go back.
remember it. It was awful. Yeah.
Yeah, we were just below base camp when that happened.
Really?
We went back in 2015, and we were on the mountain below Camp 1 when the earthquake hit Nepal. And we got a big power avalanche. We were trapped up there for 2 days, and sadly we lost 3 of our team at base camp. So in a very short time, quite a lot happened. And I said I finished my A levels. I literally scraped through them, because at the time I was training and fundraising for Everest. Um, and and so for me, identity and purpose has always been really important. And having experienced all the trauma of that at 19, being in this like natural disaster death zone, I really lost my sense of identity. And so my mental health has had peaks and troughs since I've been about 16, and that was one of the lowest troughs. But in principle, I've been looking for challenges to overcome adversity ever since, and I'm always trying to find the next challenge, the next bar. And more recently now, that focus has been about giving back and creating a legacy and trying to help other people through storytelling, speaking, writing, and fundraising.
So can we go back to the first time going through the lakes with your mates in the hills and what that looked like? Because I can tell you about my first introduction to mountains was the Pyrenees. And I quit smoking. And one night I'd sent a text message to my mates. I was saying, this is 30 years ago or something ridiculous. And I texted my mates one night stupidly saying, right, I'm going to cycle through the Pyrenees in a year, because the nurse I was seeing to quit smoking with said, save up your money, as though you were spending it on cigarettes and spending on something nice. I just thought, oh yeah, cycle through the Pyrenees, that'll be nice. So I thought, like, a year later, all my mates being who they are, said, right, have you bought the bike yet, Noel? And so I shunted off to Spain and cycled through the Pyrenees, not knowing that I would love being in mountains. And it was a transformative experience. I mean, I cannot describe just how much I learned about myself, the experience of just being up that high. I mean, I wasn't climbing, I was using the roads because I was on a bicycle, but going through the Pyrenees on the Spanish side, ending up in the Val d'Aran, and then going across the French side down to the River Garonne and Garonne Valley, was, I mean, I hesitate to use this word because I'm not a spiritualist, but it was something like that. It was quite strange. And it was that sort of transformative sort of personality forming experience, which, and I literally discovered I'd always been a bit indifferent or ambivalent about this whole I want to live or I don't want to live and thing, but I discovered in the mountains, I absolutely want to live. I discovered a real desire to survive, which I just didn't know was there, to be honest.
Yeah.
What was your experience?
Yeah, I totally relate to that and that transformation. I mean, that hill walk seems very insignificant, at least it wasn't like I was a massive week away or a trip abroad, but it was something I hadn't done before. And I still remember just the environment, looking out of the hills, gave me this whole new perspective and realized that there's a whole world out there and that there was something bigger than me and my problems. And there was just this, the only way I can describe it is a spiritual connection and this feeling of just blowing my mind at just what was out there. And I've had that sense of belonging, that sense of home in the lakes ever since. That's why I moved here, and I never get bored of it. I just find different ways of exploring it.
Scafell as well is just, I'm so jealous. I mean, I will often go and spend a weekend at Scafell, just grab a tent. I shouldn't say this, but on wild camp at the bottom, and then climb up and just sit on the top of it, and it's just the best thing in the world.
It is. I mean, for example, last Friday we went up and camped Kentmere, and Kentmere is a lovely quiet valley near Kendal. I shouldn't say this because it's going to suddenly become very busy, but it was one of the first walks that when I was on that holiday with Tom and his family. Kentmere was one of the walks that we did. And I still remember, even this is 2010, so 14 years ago. I was 29 now. I was like 14 at the time. I still remember that feeling of just wonder of seeing this place. And so actually we went and camped up and didn't see a single person, had the whole mountains to ourselves, even in the summer.
That experience is special, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And Scafell Pike, I'll be honest, is generally very busy. It's not where I normally go to, but there are so many quiet spots. And also, when I've been in my lowest points, mountains give me hope. They make me realize there is always another peak. There is always something worth going for, and they blow me away more times than I can ever count, and they keep me going. And in the pandemic, it was this sense of grounding. It was this sense of, okay, the world's gone mad, but out here it's okay, you know, and I still come back to that.
So you had this sort of dream of Everest, which, you know, mountains will do this, they'll crush your dreams because they have a sense in which they have a life of their own. But I understand that there was a goal. I thought about doing Everest. I decided not to because of this sort of cognitive damage that might happen. And I need to be able to function with my brain, because above the dead zone, you're beginning to lose brain cells. And I'm already losing them, so I can't afford any more to go. So I decided not to do it, but I decided to continue the mountaineering below the dead zone because I really love it. And that thing of being somewhere with a small group of people and seeing a vista, seeing a view, and resetting my brain, it really resets my brain. So you have this sort of crisis, not surprising, because that would have been terrifying. Because both those events were extraordinarily horrific events and very frightening events. And also because I could presume you were at base camp, were you, when it happened, or were you further up?
The second year we just left base camp that morning, so we were actually moving through the icefall. We were just below camp 1, so we were about 6,000 meters. So we were nearly the height of we're nearly at the height of Kilimanjaro. So we were pretty high. Yeah,
and people need to understand that even in base camp sounds like a really nice. It's still high up. It's amazing.
Yeah,
and it's a risk. Yeah. And you're isolated, and you can't just walk out or drive a car out. It's about 2-week hike to get into it, isn't it? So
generally, yeah, you go up very slowly to acclimatize. You can get down in about 2 days, 2 or 3 days if you really went for it. But yeah, you're at 5,000.
An earthquake going on at the time. That's a bit of a challenge, right? So,
yes,
it's a very vulnerable place, is what I'm saying, when these disasters happen. And that earthquake in particular was such a huge disaster. So it would have been quite terrifying, really, quite sort of.
Yeah, I mean, well, just being in the icefall, I was on my own at the point as well, because most of the team were a lot faster than me. They'd raced ahead to camp 1. So I was on my own. I was pulling on the rope, and I remember being so knackered that I didn't actually feel the earthquake at first. But when it hit, I didn't know there'd been an earthquake. All I remember was this big avalanche coming out of nowhere, and just for the first time in my life, genuinely at 19, thinking, this is it. And I'd never felt that before, and I never want to feel it again. And that split second, genuine, true fear in the pit of your stomach, like there's nothing I can do now. It's coming. That's it. Because you only assume the worst, and actually we just got hit by a big blast of powder, which I don't even know how long it lasted. Lasted long enough, put it that way. And that it was terrifying. It was but it was a shock. You know, I didn't really realize what had happened, and the damage kind of happened afterwards. You know, when I came home, and then it didn't really sink in. Nothing really sank in until I got home and realized just what I'd been involved with, and realized that I've been very fortunate. You know, I'd escaped the drama and all the death, and realizing that had we not left base camp that morning, I wouldn't be on the podcast now. You know, pretty much guaranteed. And what that did was give me a really interesting perspective on just how fragile life is. But as well, to begin with, there was a lot of trauma. There was probably post-traumatic stress that I didn't deal with, because like the Sherpas, I wanted to try and turn this into something positive and give something back, and, you know, try and distract myself from this experience.
So what was your next steps after that then? You came back home, you realised this is really me. You have symptoms of PTSD, no doubt.
We spent about a week walking down to Lukla, which is the airport. We were trapped at camp 1 for 2 days. We got airlifted by helicopter because the route was gone. We spent a few days trying to let all the injured and all the dead kind of get off. So they were obviously the first priority to, you know, get them out of there. And then we went back to Kathmandu for a few days before we could kind of get an emergency flight home. And I got back home in sort of mid-May, and I remember it was bittersweet because I didn't really want to be home. I didn't really want to be anywhere. And my family were obviously relieved, and I just felt this sense of guilt. You know, we lost 3 of our Sherpas. We were a tiny part in this disaster which had taken 9,000 lives. And I just remember this feeling of just guilt at like, why me, why not them? You know, I got on the bike. I remember doing long bike rides and walks just to try and process this thing. I moved to the Lake District for a few months working in a youth hostel. I thought I need to be in the mountains to try and deal with this, where it began. I started writing my first book, Icefall, which was essentially the tale from childhood to Everest 1 and 2. And writing was always very therapeutic. I've always enjoyed writing. So that kind of helped, but I spent too much time cycling in the lakes and didn't actually write in the book. So I had to move back home again to get the book finished. And I just remember, I just threw myself into everything, you know, into fundraising, cycling. You know, I decided if I couldn't climb Everest, I was going to cycle it. So I cycled up and down the hill in the Pennines for over 29,000 vertical feet to obviously fundraise for the victims. And I just tried to turn this disaster into something positive. So I kept myself busy, but I probably wasn't looking, I didn't want to deal with what I'd just experienced. And I remember a good friend of mine, Rich, who'd been in the army. He'd seen a lot of this stuff before, and he just said to me, you know, this is probably the best thing that's ever happened to you. But I didn't realize what he meant until perhaps hindsight afterwards. So the end of that year is when it all really fell apart.
Yeah. And you've had symptoms of depression, anxiety, invasive thoughts, all of those PTSD type things.
Yeah. I mean, my first episode with any kind of mental health was as a child, you know, was anxiety and panic attacks. My first bout of depression was when I was 16. That was triggered actually by a breakup, my very first breakup, something as seemingly small as that. But, you know, you only have your resources to deal with that and what you know at the time. That was when I got into running. And running became my way of sort of medicating myself and dealing with that. So I didn't actually need any kind of further support. I managed to come through that on my own. The second biggest bout was when I got injured before Everest. So I couldn't run for a year. I lost that coping mechanism. And I suffered with, you know, lots of depression, and eating disorder, bulimia as well. So that bulimia was triggered by not being able to exercise for a long period of time.
Just again, it's another triggering subject, these eating disorders, particularly guys are honest enough to talk about it. So thank you, Alex, for sharing it. Because it's often eating disorders are thought of only as something that young girls have, but it is increasingly we're seeing young men have some of those anorexia, but often we will see young men with sort of bulimic type stuff. So bulimia, for people who don't know, is a disordered emotional relationship to food. Sometimes people call it emotional eating. It involves sort of binging food and purging food often, but people look like they're healthy and their BMI is normal and healthy, so there are no warning signs, but the individual knows. Sorry about the thumbs up that's come up. I don't know why. It seems to recognize my hand signals, this computer, and handsome on the screen, so apologies for that. And often I think with young men in particular, what you see is the purging isn't so much the vomiting, which is the standard purging, but will be through exercise, actually, through overworking in the gym or running. How did your bulimia, and there are great organizations out there. The Beat is a fantastic organization for help with young people with any form of eating disorder. So again, we'll put the links to that. So how did yours manifest? What were you sort of doing?
I think exactly as you say, it's more common in men. And just to mention as well, there was a great project called Project actually Red S, so RED-S, which has been set up more focused on eating disorders, you know, in sports and athletes, because I think those people are perhaps more prone to it. And as you say, that stigma around it being mostly kind of a female issue is what stopped me asking for help for such a long time. For me, it manifested in not being able to exercise and therefore trying to control my kind of weight through, you know, purely by diet instead. And being a perfectionist, you know, very much an overachiever mindset, I struggled to kind of live up to my own expectations, and therefore I kind of failed to live this perfect healthy diet. And by cutting things out, you kind of want them even more. And I then realized I had this really nasty combination of depression and being injured and being surrounded by a lot of food because I worked in the kitchen. So I realized I could have my cake and eat it too with purging. And what actually happened then was, what started as a healthy intention was probably the least healthy thing I could have done, and damaged my relationship with food for over 8 years. And because then I was stuck in this cycle of binging to cope with the stress, and as you say, it's emotional, then purging. But then it's very, very hard to stop. Even when I got back to sport, the cycle was still there. And exercise was my way of kind of purging to an extent. But even with exercise, the purging was still there. And any kind of emotional stress, even sometimes when I was bored, it would happen. And I tried everything I could to stop it in my own way, like I always had. Realized I couldn't. And so even when I was generally well, it was always kind of a risk factor that if I was surrounded by, say, like a buffet, or a big meal, or going for a meal out, or even having binge foods at home, like a pack of biscuits, would be a trigger. I remember even on one of my expeditions, it happened in a tent because there was too much food around. Even when I was in a really happy place, I had no stress around me, so it controlled my life for a long time. But like everything, I tried to deal with it by myself. And with depression, I was more happy to talk about that. At the end of 2015, so after the end of this year of kind of busyness and the Everest trauma, I did eventually realize that this was something I couldn't deal with on my own. And I saw my GP and, burst into tears, having dealt with this on my own for such a long time. And I started medication, but the bulimia was still there. That was the one thing I never spoke about, because as a endurance athlete, as a man, I always saw myself as sort of tough enough that I shouldn't have this, and that stigma stopped me talking about it. But as you say, with bulimia, because I was exercising, I looked perfectly healthy. It was very, very secretive.
It is really difficult.
And
absolutely.
I did have like a period where I was very underweight, so that was more anorexia. That was what concerned everybody around me, but the bulimia was much easier to hide. Basically, to kind of skip a few years ahead, I didn't go for help with that until 2018, when I got injured again. I was marathon training. I was clearly underweight, and that was a way of almost controlling things when things were going wrong. Was I used to control my diet instead. I now consider myself as like fully recovered. I started therapy for that in 2019. I've had relapses as recently as last year, but I see them as blips, compared to where I was, and the relationship I had with food and weighing everything and having to avoid things. I never ever thought I'd recover. I genuinely never thought. I thought there's no way I'm going to get back. And with the right therapist, it was possible. And now I realize that to be able to do all these crazy runs and things, I have to fuel myself, but that was undoubtedly triggered by what happened on Everest, and that was the hard trauma.
That's fair. So did you have CBT, especially for the eating, and some EMDR maybe?
I tried 3 different things over the years, and I did that independently, so my family didn't even know about it for many years. The first 2 therapists I tried, one was private, then one was for the NHS. I can't remember much, it was a while ago, but the second one was ACT, so acceptance commitment therapy.
Really good stuff.
That personal therapy didn't work for me, and generally I've always just tried to default to setting challenges instead, and that's kind of just taken over. But the problem was, when those things are taken away, it's still there. When I hit my lowest point in 2018, I went back in the NHS, and I can't remember the exact model, but we used a book by Christopher Fairburn, I think, which essentially was, I think, based on CBT as a model. But by working through the book and having like sessions every single week, it was quite an intensive therapy process. I was so grateful to Amy, my therapist, and having that support, because it worked. And again, I still have blips, but that's fine. I deal with them. On the whole, what I realize now is I am my own therapist. I have the tools to deal with that.
Brilliant. And it's really important people understand that these things are treatable. And also, it's always the same. The story that you're giving me, it's always the same. That didn't work, so I then tried this, and that didn't work. Then eventually I tried this, and this is what worked. And that thing about what we call help-seeking behavior is what will help you. It's because there's no one size fits all in this situation. It sounds like you've developed greater insight into how the over-exercising might be just an unhelpful coping mechanism. And it sounds like you've moved into a healthier sort of relationship to this stuff now, the challenges, and you have a broader sort of base of support, which brings us, I guess, to this sort of final bit, which is thinking about setting up this charity and why you set it up and how it works and what you're achieving with it.
Yeah, blimey. Well, where to start with Mine Over Mountains, really. It's you know, it's been quite a journey. I've always done challenges for charity. It always has felt like the right thing to do. And my Climb the UK challenge in 2017 was for young minds. I'm sure you know is the biggest mental health charity for young people, because I've seen just how little help was available for me and how long it took to get the help I needed. But I think what struck me was that it took me longer to cycle, walk, run, and kayak nearly 5,000 miles around the country than it did to get an appointment for the help I needed on the NHS as a young man for bulimia and depression. And that's not a criticism of the service. It's more a case of the reality of the amount of demand and, you know, not enough resource available. And back to the piece around being open and sharing about it. As I said, for a long time, I didn't talk about this. I spoke about everything else, but the depression and the bulimia was like the elephant in the room. I didn't feel comfortable talking about that on stage like everything else. But before I started Climb the UK, I remember reading a blog in The Guardian about another runner who had bulimia, made me realise it wasn't just me, and that by sharing my story could help other people to feel like they weren't alone and actually encourage them to access the therapy, which I hadn't done. So I remember posting a blog on my website and about everything, just put it all out there, terrifying, like what on earth have I done? And had nothing but a positive response, like the guy in The Guardian, you know, told, and seeing it as a gift. So basically, as a result of being open, and it was as a result of doing this challenge and all the media coverage that I got approached to be like a lead on an event in the Lake District, which is all around using the outdoors for mental health by a group called Adventure Uncovered. So we kind of co-designed this weekend retreat in May 2018. I brought in Chris, who is a coach and a counsellor who'd been my first mentor through the Everest journey many years ago. Wanted him to help the group in the way that he'd helped me. And basically this weekend retreat, I wanted it to be more than just about walking, because we know it helps, but as you say, what can you do on a consistent basis? It's about habits. It's not just a one-off intervention.
That's right.
Yeah. And for me, the outdoors has been my kind of natural health service, as I call it. It's not a cure, but it's a tool. And I think we need to get to prevention rather than cure. And basically, we combine hill walking, you know, it's hill walking, it's coaching in groups, it's counselling, it's mindfulness and inspirational speakers. So you've got this full holistic package in the outdoor environment where walking side by side in the mountains makes it easier to talk about things than perhaps it would in a face-to-face in a typical environment.
Yeah, perfect. Absolutely.
So basically, we did that first retreat, blown away by the impacts. We decided to set this up as a charity so we could help more people. Then the pandemic came along, so we had to adapt to doing like a one-day walk so we could get around all the restrictions on group sizes. And now we're back to doing day walks and weekend retreats all across England and Wales for anybody over 18. We've worked in the NHS, we've worked a lot on emergency services, dealing with the trauma that they face. It's been really humbling to support them. Organisations all around the country. And so we've grown, and I'm still a trustee, but we now have a brilliant team of people who believe in the vision, and we're growing very fast. So it's a privilege to watch it grow. Never planned to start a charity when I was 23, but the demand is there, and I hope this will be my legacy, really.
Well, the demand is there because it works, and I know it works, and you know it works. But also doing it in full recognition of it needs extra input as well, because you and I have both made the similar mistakes in terms of the challenges and over reliance on them as as a cure, and they don't. We need a complex package for complex people, and harnessing the healing of nature while also dealing with some of the reasons why people need that healing is a very sensible way of approaching it. So what's the website for your organization? What's it? How can people get hold of it?
Yeah, if people want to attend our events, or if they know someone who might benefit, it's mindovermountains.org.uk. All of our events and retreats, and also bursaries if people need them. All the information and signposting is on the website.
And do people need a certain level of fitness or anything like that to be able to join, or is it sort of caters for all comers?
We obviously try to be as inclusive as we can. Inevitably we are walking in a lot of mountain environments. It's not all about big hills. We obviously, especially in the winter, we do kind of low-level valley walks as well. We do work with a real range of abilities, and it's not a race. It's about being in the moment, being in the environment with like-minded people and professional mental health support. But yeah, people do need to be able to walk independently. And we have different walks available for different abilities and fitnesses. But if people have any questions, they can always have a look on our site or get in touch as well.
And did you say you've written another book as well? Because I think you said my first book, or did I mishear you?
I do have 2 books, yeah. So Icefall, in fact, Icefall is here. That's my first one. That's about Everest 1 and 2.
Right.
And my second book, that came out in 2016. My second book is called Another Peak, and that came out in 2019, which is pretty much about how you pick yourself up when you lose your identity in life. And then it talks a lot about my journey around the country, a lot more on the mental health stuff, and kind of how nature has helped me through that.
Yeah, and people should know. I mean, I know this because of my own experience and my practice and my research, but people should know that nature is now being prescribed by the health service and there's more and more research happening into it. And you will probably have already seen one of my podcasts by a gardening organisation, which is used by the NHS to treat severe and enduring mental health problems. So horticulture therapy, these things now are becoming much more available. And people should ask themselves this question: why did we keep the parks open during the pandemic? Nothing else. Because we know that there's a thing called the biophilic effect. Some people challenge whether that's real or not, but we know that nature has an impact upon us, which is incredibly changes, lowers our heart rate, improves our thinking and our decision making, and increases our sense of connection to each other. So in cities, for example, people have heard me say this before, when you build a park in a city, violent crime around that park drops by 20% simply because you built that park. And it's so profound, the effect of nature. So in London, for example, the Metropolitan Police I don't know if they still are, but they used to invest some of their budget in greening spaces, in greening areas, because they knew it would control crime for them. And so this stuff is profoundly important. It's not the old hippie version of maybe you want to be an old hippie and hug a tree, but our nature, our green spaces are crucial to our health and well-being as human beings, absolutely crucial, because we are natural products ourselves. We're part of nature. We're not separate of it. Whatever our brains tell us, we are an aspect of nature and we need it. And we need to protect it in the way that we would want to protect ourselves. And it's just, I mean, your story is extraordinary, as you know, and everybody will tell you that. It's been a real pleasure to have you on. Absolute pleasure. I'm so glad that you set up the organisation that you have, and I would encourage people to get in touch. Just in terms of vulnerabilities and things like that, people have coming along for mental health projects, I presume you have some sort of assessment and look out for it and sort of do sort of safety assessments and all that sort of stuff.
Sure, yeah. I mean, so all of our events are led by obviously fully trained walk leaders, it's coaches, counsellors, and psychotherapists. So there is an element of people obviously have to, when people sign up to an event, there is, an element, obviously contracting and screening to make sure that we are best able to support them. We do work with a real range of different challenges, and people with or without a diagnosed mental health, actually do have, speech is gone now, a diagnosed mental health problem. But basically to make sure we are best able, to support that. But for sure, we do ask for information to people that they are willing to disclose it in full confidentiality, just so that we are prepared and able to support them in a potentially challenging environment.
Yeah, and also because I think that some of the people who watch this show will be other professionals who might want to make a referral, so they need to know this information more than the public. So GPs, other therapists, and stuff like that. And if you are a health professional listening to this is real stuff, folks.
Yeah,
it really works. It's very effective. The research base for it is unassailable. We need to do a few more RCTs around it to know specifically about how it works and the mechanisms. But the research base is there now. So I would encourage people to get in touch. We have to leave it there for now, Alex. Is there anything you want to say just before we finish that you would want to sort of get across to people, and then we'll sort of wrap the show up?
No, honestly, it's been a privilege, and thank you for just obviously forming just a safe space to be able to chat and share these things and signpost. I think is really important. With that work as well, just to say that we are already starting to get kind of people who, we are really trying to focus, on the social prescribing, and GPs have been sending people to us, which has always been my vision from the start. So we'd love to do more of that. If I personally can help anybody, if anybody wants to contact me, my email inbox is always open. I'd be really happy to share and and signpost if I can. But no, there's always more challenges ahead. But thank you for the chance to share a bit of the journey so far.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks. I hope you've enjoyed that. Our natural spaces are so crucial to us. So protect whatever you've got, even if it's your local community garden, whatever it is, invest in that. And make sure that you look after it, because by doing that, you're looking after yourself. Wonderful to have you on. You stay there. Goodbye, everybody. I hope you've really enjoyed it. I'll see you at the next show, and have a great evening, everybody. And if you want to get in touch with me, usual number 07506 319 745. So have a great evening, folks. Bye-bye.